Honey, does your fox bite?
Yes.
Can I pet him anyway?
It's your hand.
I'm gonna pet him.
With Pillars of Eternity, Obsidian promised to recapture the essence of the great, classic Infinity Engine games. With a real-time and pause combat system, a heavy focus on dialogue and writing, and an expansive world to adventure in, Pillars of Eternity tries to be one of the main contenders in the modern cRPG genre. A genre that has seen quite a bit of revitalization in the recent past. Having spent roughly 50 hours on Pillars of Eternity by now, I can wholeheartedly say they succeeded. Here's my spoiler-free review of Pillars of Eternity. Any significant story elements that will be explicitly revealed in this review should all be from the very beginning of the game. In Pillars of Eternity, your main character can come from many different walks of life. During character creation, you're asked to pick not only race, but also region of origin and a profession or background, ranging from laborer to clergyman or even raider. Either way though, you start your adventure traveling with a caravan, and after an eventful evening, you find out that you are something called a Watcher, a unique individual with the ability to connect to lingering souls. Throughout Pillars of Eternity, it is then your task to find out what this exactly entails, and as you do so, will get involved in numerous nefarious situations from simple thievery or rebellious citizens to scorned gods and forgotten races. Immediately, two strong suits stand out. First of all, the aesthetic design is simply beautiful and suits the game very well. Environments feature all kinds of unusual materials and interesting details, characters, which look very grounded, fit in well with the numerous backdrops. The result is a very strong sense of atmosphere, which can range from the fantastical to dark and eerie. Secondly, the writing in Pillars of Eternity is superb, and showcases a number of different storytelling techniques. As you read through the dialogue, quite a large part of it being voiced on that note, it will give you not merely the literal words of a character, but also their current stance or small changes in their expressions. Though of course you can't actually see the character models display emotions and behaviors, the writing does an excellent job at pulling you in. Pillars of Eternity showcases how effective good writing can be. Furthermore, you have a lot, and I do mean a lot, of input on how these conversations play out. Earlier I mentioned backgrounds, well these are but one of many little deviations that can change the dialogue. Although the NPCs you engage with won't often treat you differently based on your race, background or class, it does provide you with tons of different dialogue choices, allowing you to control the narrative, especially the case with the different paladin orders and priest deities. Many of the dialogue options also shape your reputation and can affect the initial stance of an NPC you might encounter. Some NPCs are more likely to trust you, for instance, if you have built up a reputation of being honest. Again, these are not dramatic changes, but many small, different ways in how your story pans out, which also serves to really make your character feel like your character. Attributes, too, play a crucial role in dialogue, and for the most part this is a good thing, but an oddity does arise. Essentially, the way these attributes are balanced for gameplay purposes clashes with the narrative purposes they might hold. For instance, your ideal wizard, from a combat perspective, has an incredibly high might score, as this directly improves the damage output you can do. Paladins, on the flip side, benefit very little from might, as they generally serve a tanking role and aren't as much concerned with doing damage themselves. The result being that your wizard ends up being really effective at moving boulders and cutting through obstacles, while your paladin basically has to watch him do all the heavy lifting. Similarly, intelligence, which increases the area of effect range and duration of abilities, is not only good for casters, but also incredibly effective for barbarians. Now the slightly annoying part here is, if like me you can't completely ignore your inner min-maxer, you'll have to start picking between combat effectiveness and narrative. I didn't care much for my wizard passing my checks, amusing as it was at times, but I did care for him not passing perception or resolve checks, two attributes that serve very little purpose for a wizard, but do allow you to note significant elements in dialogue, or persuade people through mental intimidation. The result being that I basically went with attributes I wasn't entirely happy with and was unable to pass any dialogue perception checks throughout the entire game. On that note, this attribute narrative oddity seems to represent itself in companion NPCs as well. For instance, Aloth, a wizard companion you receive early on in the game, has a rather high perception of 16, which, again, is almost entirely useless for a wizard, while doing subpar damage due to his average might score of 12. An oddity and slight annoyance for sure, it doesn't in any way make him useless, but it can be a little irritating. Beyond that though, dialogue is fantastic, and it is great to see that you have so much input over the way conversations go due to all these variables. As for combat then, as stated earlier, it is real-time with a pause at will option. Combat back in the Infinity Engine games had not been the easiest for newcomers, and although Pillars of Eternity does lack some feedback when it comes to debuffs cast on your party, and abilities can easily be lost in the beautiful but sometimes overwhelming sea of special spell effects, Pillars of Eternity shouldn't be too challenging to get into and ends up being an incredibly fun experience. Combat is rather quick, and fights are usually short. Your initial starting position, proper use of abilities, and character build are then the most important parts when it comes to achieving victory. Classes come in various shapes and sizes, and Pillars of Eternity manages to make each and every one of those classes feel unique and useful in some regard. Wizard, Priest, Druids, and Ciphers are your caster classes, and none of them share the same abilities. Wizards are limited to spells contained within their grimoires, meaning that they can only slot 4 spells of each level at any given time. Meanwhile, Priests and Druids have access to every spell when they reach the appropriate level, and all 3 of these can only cast a set amount of spells from each spell level until they rest. And resting in Pillars of Eternity can't be done an unlimited amount of times, as you are only capable of carrying 4 camping supplies at any given time. The result of this is that you have to keep your supplies in mind and need to be careful and on point when using your abilities. Ciphers, on the other hand, can in theory use spells forever, as they use a different focus resource for those. But the non-caster classes certainly have abilities to keep in mind as well. Whether you're playing as a fighter, paladin, monk, barbarian, ranger, or rogue, each of these start with a per encounter ability, meaning you can use it a set amount of times every single time you enter combat, and through leveling up can unlock a few more. Chanter then is the last of the 11 classes and uses an entirely different system altogether, the point being that each of these classes feels unique and plays differently in combat. Now, units can't take a whole lot of damage, and Pillars of Eternity has a rather unique system for managing health. They essentially have 2 health bars. Every time a character is damaged, the unmitigated part of it is done to both of these bars, called Endurance and Health. Endurance is your short-term health pool, and most in-combat healing only works for this, while Health is your long-term health pool and is much more difficult to restore, generally only done so by resting. When a character drops to 0 Endurance, he is knocked out for the remainder of the fight. Providing you then win the fight, he will get back up to his feet. When his larger health reaches 0, he initially gets maimed, which sets him to 1 health maximum with a debuff. Were he to lose that 1 health point, he will then permanently die. You can also remove the main part out of the equation if you're feeling particularly masochistic with a specific gameplay setting. But the Endurance is a nice addition that makes moving from fight to fight less painful and a lot quicker, as generally the first couple of times that a party member takes damage and might get knocked down, you're still more than good to go for the next couple of brawls. Experience points are then not rewarded for combat itself, the exception being that every time you encounter a new unit type, you can complete the bestiary entry, and doing so will reward experience. But no, most of the time experience comes from doing actual tasks and quests. Essentially, it always drives you forward looking for new objectives to complete and makes grinding enemies obsolete. This system then pretty much guarantees that you reach the endgame of character development before the end of the main questline, because in Pillars of Eternity there is definitely enough to do when it comes to quests. Pillars of Eternity does deviate from the Infinity Engine games in quite a number of other ways as well. For one, it is worth noting that pre-buffing, meaning you cast your positive buffing spells on yourself before you enter combat, is entirely outlawed. In Pillars of Eternity, you simply cannot do it. And this is a bit of a double-edged sword. On one hand, it is great that the game is not balanced around having you spend minutes of layering buffs upon buffs on yourself before you engage in a fight, but on the other hand, it is a specific playstyle that undoubtedly some people will miss and makes building, say, a melee wizard less of a viable choice. What did bother me is that stealth is not individual, meaning that either your entire party is stealthed or no one is at all. For me, this made the rogue class significantly less appealing, as you can't really have your rogue sneak behind enemies in preparation of a fight. Doing this in Pillars of Eternity will likely just end up in a dead rogue, as he gets kicked out of stealth as soon as combat begins, meaning enemies will immediately pounce on him. That being said though, the rogue class is still a very useful, high damage dealing class. Finally, I stated that there is plenty to do in Pillars of Eternity when it comes to quests. The world is divided into a lot of small maps, and navigating back and forth is completely up to you, with plenty of secrets to find around every corner. Throughout your journey, you might then encounter 8 written companions, each completely voiced, well written, and with plenty of input on your journey. Or, alternatively, you can hire mercenaries and create a party completely from scratch. In the end, I simply can't praise Pillars of Eternity enough. It is superbly written, has a fantastic atmosphere, is filled and littered with dialogue options and quests, and features a very enjoyable, relatively fast combat system with a wide array of different classes that feel significantly different in playstyle. It took me probably 30 hours to complete my first playthrough on the normal difficulty, and I hadn't solved a number of companion quests, hadn't gone to entire areas yet, and still had about 3 more levels until the level cap. There is enough to do, and all of it seems to be high quality. Pillars of Eternity does a lot of things differently than the Infinity Engine games, and I haven't even gone over mechanics like an infinite, always accessible stash, removing the need for inventory management, something you can turn off if you wish, or the stronghold that you receive early on in the game, which offers a nice little but very simplistic way of having your own little power base with useful merchants. But that aside, it is a fantastic interpretation of what made those games amazing, and the result is that Pillars of Eternity, to me, is as perfect as a game like this will get. I assume I don't need to say that I'd recommend Pillars of Eternity at this point, but I do definitely recommend Pillars of Eternity.